2,
Three.
3.
Ah,
What'd you do?
Okay.
A karate chop? All right.
no,
Okay.
it's paper. Yeah.
Paper's like
Well, we
this, not like
seconded.
this.
Okay, I'll do the introduction.
Okay. This is horrible.
Damn it. I'm old now. I can't
Yeah,
do kids games.
So karate chop meets paper. I got it.
Yeah, totally. Welcome to the Professional Evil Perspective, Episode 7. I'm Kevin Johnson.
And I'm Nathan Sweeney.
And we are the dumbest smart people ever, according to Kathy.
Yeah, we're leaving that in.
For the record, we just failed at rock, paper, scissors, whatever.
Like 3 times.
3 times.
I did learn that apparently
49. Obviously, I'm too old to do it.
It's exactly, yeah. I never knew that karate chop meets paper. Like that was a new one to me.
It wasn't a karate chop. It was a sideways paper.
That was clearly a karate chop. Oh gosh, the sideways paper thing. Quick story before we get started. Kathy and I were on site at a hospital doing a physical pen test this week, and they had one of those doors where it's like got a magnetic closer, but it opens automatically when you walk up to it.
Is this the stick?
Well, before the stick, right? So we got the stick in there, waving it around. Before that, I had a copy of like the ISSA journal, you know, that free magazine they send you that most people throw away. I mean, read thoroughly. I had that in my bag, and so I'm like pushing it through the gap, and I get it almost to the edge, and then I bam, hit it real hard, and it like flies through the hallway and hits the wall on the other side. And I guess there were people down the hall that like all of a sudden they heard this like whack. And they look down and there's a magazine on the floor. And
that came from nowhere.
Exactly.
They're like, Ghost magazine.
And because it's a hospital, they're like, oh well, whatever. And then, like nobody came to investigate it all.
My understanding is that you were sticking a stick through the hole between the doors and like waving it up and down. And your contact was actually at the other end of the hallway and has a video of this stick just waving around up and down.
That was attempt number 2.
That is awesome. That is awesome. So,
oh man.
Cool. So, today we want to talk about, and I know this will be a surprise to everybody because it's not in the news or popular to talk about, but OKTA was breached.
Yeah. There's so much to the story.
There is so much to the story. For a quick introduction, right? Lapsus with a dollar sign.
I don't know how to say it. Lapsus.
I don't know.
How do you pronounce the dollar sign? Is that an S, an extra S?
I'm assuming that is a take on the hidden file share from S&B shares, right?
I wondered. It seemed like yeah.
But I don't know because I'm not the 17-year-old kid who names a ransomware hacker group.
Or maybe it's like it's a computer name in Active Directory.
Yeah, maybe. Right.
I don't know.
But so they're a group of people, things, whatever's doing ransomware attacks. The one interesting thing that I think about Lapsus, one interesting thing, not the one, is that so many of their attacks they publicize before they're done.
Yeah,
right. Like Microsoft has claimed, and again, I say claimed. Right. That they were able to stop the complete exfiltration of source code because the Lapsus group was bragging about it in a public Telegram channel, right?
Was it a public channel, or like my understanding was the group kind of formed? It sounds like it's basically a group of kids that kind of formed just from some various other groups, and so I guess maybe it is I'm using air quotes here, public channel, but kind of like semi not public. It's just
I would agree with that. That's my understanding as well. But it's interesting to me that like, hey, we got this thing and we're going to talk about it, and all of a sudden it's like the victim organization is able to stop it. I think to me, what I'd like to focus on, and I think this is what we discussed earlier, is I would like to focus on both the handling of the breach publicly by OKTA and
or lack of
handling of the breach, or lack of, or the handling of the breach by the InfoSec community, because I think that there are positives and negatives in both cases, right? And I'm interested in. I think you're cool.
Yeah, totally. I think. So let's summarize what happened recently. There's been some attacks. These are the folks that compromised NVIDIA a while back, and they eventually it got to extortion where they were saying, hey, you're going to do this or we're going to publicize all of your, secret stuff. And then recently, sometime last week or early this week, they published some saying, hey, we've got Microsoft source code and we've got access to Microsoft stuff. And then eventually it came out that they had compromised, I think it was an Okta support engineer account.
Yeah.
And then from there said basically, hey, we have access to all of Okta stuff. Come to find out, it wasn't all of Okta stuff. They hadn't compromised everything, but some percentage. Okta says 2.5%. I think of their customers.
No, I'm really curious about that number. Right?
Yeah.
They presented it as 2.5% of their customers, but my question is, okay, out of the 2.5% of your customers, how many percent of your accounts are those? Because like if I compromised a customer that is a dental office that has 5 people that work there,
right,
that's significantly different than compromising. Like I saw somebody posting social media talking about the InfoSec response to this in a conversation that I was reading through and part of. Somebody's like, well, look, NVIDIA uses Okta, so obviously they were hit by this. And it's like, no, actually. And then somebody else came back and said, no, actually, that's not what happened to NVIDIA. And my understanding is the person who responded was actually part of the IR for the NVIDIA stuff.
yeah.
So they were discussing it from a position of actual expertise, not, like my expertise right now of, I read it online, it must be true.
Right.
Right.
So Okta advertises having 15,000 customers. So,
right. But if one of those customers has 4 billion accounts, if that customer was hit, rather than that dental office, right? That 2.5% is really I don't want to say misleading, but easily misunderstated or something, right?
Well, and that goes to your point about handling breaches and disclosure and all this kind of stuff. Like Okta has just completely screwed the pooch on this whole process of publicizing what happened, right? They came out and they're like, oh, I saw a tweet. This was hilarious. Someone said, we were not hacked. And then they came back and said, well, there was a hacking attempt. And then it came back, well, we were hacked, but it really doesn't matter. Oh, well, it was only 2.5% of our customers were hacked. And then, oh, getting hacked is actually really a good thing. I'm glad we're hacked, right? Like it just keeps going of like, they keep modifying their statement as they find out more. It's like,
and to be clear for the people who don't know, part of those sentences Nathan just read were not actually from Okta.
I don't know. I got an email from him earlier. They're doing a blog on 10 things we learned about being hacked and how you can prevent it. So now it's marketing spiel.
Did you really get a blog? No. Okay, I was going to say, because I got an email from Okta yesterday. One of their salespeople emailed me and wanted to know if I knew about Okta and wanted to discuss how they could manage our stuff. And I almost wrote back and said, "Is this a phishing email?" But I did not. Yeah. So you say they screwed the pooch. I don't know that I agree, and I want to be clear. I think you're right. But I think that there is more to it. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure how much better at disclosure they could have been at this point in the breach timeline, right? According to some of the things I'm reading,
okay,
they are getting information from a third party, one of their subcontractors, whatever the official term in this case is. They're getting information of a third party is who doing the investigation of themselves, right? Like this would be like if Secure Ideas was working with John Black Hills on a job. We were both working together. They were a subcontractor. We were a subcontractor. And then they got hit. They're doing an investigation of it. And we're getting word of it. And then talking about it. Bad example, but I think it works. My understanding is it's just at the beginning of March, really, that they're getting information about this breach. So I get the idea that the breach happened in January. I get that. That's a timeline.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that it's okay that they're just finally getting information in March, right? But if that's true, but even if it's not true, if I may, right, they're still doing an investigation. They're giving out information about that investigation because they're being pressured to.
Right.
The information they gave out is absolutely bad. But my question is, and this is why I say I don't necessarily agree. Did they screw the pooch because of how they handled it, or did they screw the pooch because they publicly and discussed it at all?
Yes.
Okay.
No, let me. So
Right.
here's my thoughts. First off, I think we could talk for a while about why federated authentication is important and why it's good and why
Yes.
the future of IT and information security and all that depends on successful federated authentication. We
I
have to get
agree.
away from passwords. We have to have stronger methods of authentication, and that's only going to work as we continue towards a federated approach. With that said, the organizations that provide that authentication have to be the best of the best, right? Like we have to be able to trust them completely 100% implicitly, or else people are still going to keep trying to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So they have an obligation, I think, higher than almost any other type of organization, right? They're very high up there.
I agree.
In this situation, yes, there was some kind of incident. According to their timeline, I'm looking at their website here at the timeline. The incident happened on January 20th. They discovered it. They started the investigation on January 21st. And it says the forensics firm investigation and analysis of the incident was conducted until February 28th. So, and with a report expected on March 10th. So they had an incident on January 21st. We're allowing it to go on for a full month, the investigation, and then another couple of weeks before the report. That is a really long time for this significant of an incident. Like they had to have known at some point during that time, this very likely could have impacted several of our customers. At a minimum, they had to have known that. Maybe they didn't confirm for sure that it did, but they had to have known that it could have. I feel like they have an obligation to contact those customers and say, hey,
Do we know that they didn't?
with
My
50,000
understanding is
customers, I feel like that would have been public by now.
no, no. I'm not saying that they talked to all of their customers.
Oh, you're saying they could have
Did they talk as the investigator? Because I know that when I used to do IR and forensics, as yes, the idea of the investigation took a month and then a couple weeks for the report,
Yeah.
right? Stuff like that. That's a little misleading to people who don't know, and I know you do know, right?
Yeah.
But you're in constant communication with the investigator. They are
Sure.
giving you stuff. They're right. This is not a investigate and then 2 months later you're like, oh, thanks for the report, I'm glad to hear there's information. I
Right.
know
Right.
you know that. I'm just right. But when we would do this kind of stuff, okay, we're doing this investigation, we knew customer A got hit, customer A is involved, we're working with them, we find signs that customer B got hit as well, we're gonna reach out to customer B, lock it up in non-disclosure agreements because corporate sucks, but right.
Yeah.
I don't see anything in their report that says they didn't notify anybody. And in the customers that we know of that were hit, Microsoft being one of them, right? Or at least they have not claimed that it took until March to be notified.
I have not seen anything official on that.
I've not
either
seen
way.
official that says,
Yeah.
hey, we were notified before this, but I'm hearing from and talking to people who are involved with some of these customers, but either as an employee or as in the security field, in the security part, they're not complaining about Okta's time frame. And that implies to me that Okta was talking to the customers that they believed were impacted.
So I'll challenge that for a couple of things. One,
Yeah.
If they were in conversations with those customers during that period, by this point they gain nothing by not disclosing that. It would make sense that they would have in their investigation timeline, they've included so many other details that previously would have been covered under NDA that now they've publicized. There's no reason they wouldn't have publicized. We started reaching out to our customers. We let them know and all this. So to me, their silence on that.
I agree with you that they should have said that and that it doesn't make sense they didn't.
Mhm.
I'm just saying.
Well, wait, let me finish. So that was one thing. The second is their initial response when the lapsus, whatever. I don't know how to pronounce it. When it first came out, their response was basically like, "Oh, that's not us. That couldn't have happened. That's not, And that, I mean, yeah. And then they modified it a little bit more and said, "Well, okay, maybe we know that there's something happened, but it's not." You know what I mean? Like, they kept modifying their story until Lapsus kept pushing more and more details out there and proving that it was them. So,
and I would agree with your idea, because if they say, hey, in January we knew of an incident, them saying no, we weren't hacked was after January.
Oh, absolutely. And to
Yeah.
me, when you lie about a situation like that, even if
Yep.
it's a, you know what, marketing communications put this out and they shouldn't have, and blah blah blah, whatever. To me, you lose the benefit of the doubt of
You
assuming,
absolutely do.
you know.
You
So
absolutely do. Yeah.
that's
I,
kind of where I come from of when I said they screwed the pooch. Like, at a very least, I think you and I talked about this before. They didn't have a plan for how to deal with incidents.
or they didn't use the plan.
Or
Right?
it's the same thing, right?
And I
That
want to be very
binder, that
clear.
IR binder on the counter didn't get picked up.
Yeah. And I want to be very clear. We don't know who did the first initial statements, right? Yeah. And that doesn't make it okay, but that shows they have not socialized their plan well enough. If they had a plan,
Right.
and I can't, and I want to be very clear, I cannot imagine an organization of their size, their maturity, and their responsibility not having some form of IR plan before it happened, right? Just to be clear. But I absolutely believe this is where you say, don't lie. If you don't know, say you don't know.
Yeah.
If you don't know, say, man, we don't know. We'll look into that, right? Like, you have to be open and as honest as possible. And to me, honest as possible is completely honest, right? This whole idea of, well, I told you what I could.
Right.
Okay, but then say that you're only telling us what you could, right?
Yeah,
like
people will respect that.
I have no issue with somebody saying to me, here's what I'm allowed to talk about right now publicly, and the rest of it we're working on. I may not be happy that you're not giving me the information. I may be grumbly and whiny that you're right. But at the same time, at least I know how to adjust my expectations based on what you're telling me. Yeah. And I think that ties to the second half of this, is the absolute ridiculousness of InfoSec Twitter, I guess.
Yeah, I would combine media and social media. There's two sides. Go ahead and finish your point.
The absolute ridiculous demand of instantaneous full disclosure. Like it doesn't work that way. And even if it did work that way, it doesn't. Yeah. Like there are levels. As much as we can hate this, there are levels of requirements and contracts and non-disclosure agreements that we have to even just figure out if we're allowed to talk about it, right? This is where you and I have talked about this quite often when we tell stories about pen tests and things like that. What are we even allowed to discuss? Forget what we want to discuss. Where are the lines drawn? We have some customers that we're allowed to talk openly about things we've done with them. There are other customers we're not even allowed to acknowledge they're a customer.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's, actually this made me think. So I'm going to comment on that and then take it a slightly different route, because I just realized something. It's partly the media, right? We have the 24-hour media. 24 hours doesn't even seem practical anymore. Like it's minute by minute, right? Of we got to have the latest stuff. Everybody's publishing stories of the latest thing we heard. And then social media just feeds on that and amps it up even more. And all the voices are amplified, whether they're valuable or not. But then on top of that, you've got like GDPR requires I think 72-hour notification process, which, I mean, it's so hard to know anything significant, details in 72 hours. And then
72 hours from what?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of vague on some of that. The recent SEC ruling about, I think it's 48-hour notification. I can't remember the details on that. But for public companies having to publicize details of incidents within 48 hours, that just feeds that whole thing of like, I don't know. And that's where I was going. It makes me wonder, I guess that breach in January may have, or that incident may have predated that rule change. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I don't know. How do we fix that? Like, what can we practically do as an industry to say, hey, let's be more realistic and practical here about, one, holding companies accountable, but two, not just going overboard and, jumping ship.
I don't think we can. And
well, that's pessimistic.
I'm sorry.
Well, that's pessimistic.
Yeah, no, it's defeatist. Here's why I don't think we can. I think this is like regulating medical procedures. And I'm
How
being
so?
vague on purpose to not hit any hot button topics.
Yeah, I was gonna say, man, where are we going with this? This is exciting.
I think this is the same as regulating medical procedures in such that in every example we give, somebody is going to be able to give a reasonable exception.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we end up with is either a rule, and I'm not going to say law because we can say industry standard, we can say actual law, we can say regulation, all these kind of things. We can come up with a rule that in most cases or many cases works okay, kind of, probably. But then we're going to have exceptions. And because there are reasonable exceptions, the people who want to abuse the exceptions will be able to, right?
Yeah.
So we say things like, you know what, within 72 hours, you have to tell me. Okay, 72 hours of when, right? And I'll
Right.
give you a horrible, stupid example. And I know you experienced this because you and I have come up in the industry very similarly, right? Moving from IT into security, everything else like that. I know that you have had somebody say to you, we cannot roll intrusion detection system because we're a public company and the rules from the SEC says if we know of a problem, we have to tell people.
Yeah.
So we don't roll out IDS because then we won't know of a problem,
If we
right?
don't know about it, we don't have to tell them. Yeah.
And it was like the first time I heard that, I laughed because the person had to be kidding.
Right. You can't be serious. Yeah.
Right? There's no way that's what you did. So here's the idea, right? You know what? 72 hours from being notified of a breach, you have to tell people. Great. Then I'm going to put a rule on my website that says the only breach notifications we accept is if you email devnull@secureideas.com. And we promise we'll probably look at it.
Yeah. Right. Eventually. Right.
And,
We have somebody that looks at it. After it comes in, it goes through a 5-year delay, and then we come back.
exactly. And that's what I'm saying is I'm not saying that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm saying that because the reasonable examples are so like, now let's flip over to another reasonable example, right? Years ago, there was a person, I think he's based in India, security researcher guy. He had a Twitter account that had something like 17 and a half followers, right? Like that type of account. And you figure out how you get a half follower. And so the person had like 17 and a half followers. They were following like 3 people, right? And they tweeted out, hey, Apple, I found something with your stuff, and I didn't mean to be bad, and I didn't mean to cause problems, right? And they didn't tag Apple. They just used the word Apple, and they didn't even capitalize it in the tweet, right?
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of people afterwards were like, why didn't Apple know about that? Why did Apple not, like, what's going on here? How this is ridiculous. That was a breach notification that Apple was supposed to know about.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. You can always come up with like,
but that's my point.
Absurd examples. Yeah,
but both of those examples are real examples that have happened.
Sure, but
so
I mean,
because of those exceptions and the abuse capability, that's why I think it's almost impossible to come up with a rule.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with that, because the very nature of regulation is that you're always going to have edge cases, right? Regulations are designed to hit some larger segment in the middle and forget about the edge cases, and then we write in exceptions to deal with those edge cases and try to make them better if possible. But I don't know.
Here's the reason I think that it is the problem. You're absolutely right about regulation and edge cases. Here's the reason I think it's important, and then we need to kind of wrap up because, but here's why I think it's important. At the same time that we build regulation that has edge cases and exceptions, we also have regulation that requires organizations to not disclose things, because if they disclose it and it affects the stock prices, we've done something wrong and illegal, right? The SEC has rules about how a company can talk about things that will impact their stock price. And so we have contradictory regulations.
Yeah.
I personally think saying 72 hours from knowing something reasonable, you're required to let people know, I'm cool with. But that's such a vague answer. I do believe we have to have a standard. I do believe we have to have some type of probably regulation, probably law. I don't like adding more laws. We all know that. But I just know that no matter what we come up with, organizations like OKTA are going to meet the law and not the spirit of the law.
And not the spirit of it. Going back to something I said earlier about how important federated authentication is and how, that concept is really sort of a background service that is required for everything else to work. For most other situations like that, at least in the US, we have basically made the decision that those things need to be regulated, right? Power companies are regulated. Your water services is regulated. The internet is regulated, right? Is there a point where we're going to put laws in place to say, hey, look, Okta, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, right? Like, these handful of companies, if you are going to be an identity provider, you have to agree to this level of regulation.
I don't think we need to put new laws. I think we just need to define them as part of the critical infrastructure because they are. We have very first. Broad. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I said you heard it here first. That's an interesting idea.
We already have regulations and laws that cover critical infrastructure. CISA or CISA or whatever. I don't know how to pronounce that. And I'll be honest, I was just at a conference where one of their main people were speaking and they pronounced CISA 3 different ways in their own presentation.
I've always said CISA.
So if somebody knows, let me know. But, right, they already have rules, standards, regulations, things like that for critical infrastructure. Integrated authentication should be part of the critical infrastructure.
Man, where did that... That's an interesting topic. We may have to save that for another day because I could see. Yeah. I hate saying it's a slippery slope, but it kind of is. Like, at what point do you say?
I totally believe that Pop Funkos are critical infrastructure as well.
All right, yeah, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. All right, well, let's wrap it up. It's been fun again. Kevin, we're teaching a class. I don't remember when is this. When is Wild West Hacking Fest?
So we're teaching a course. Aren't we teaching it? Well, you and I are teaching at Wild West Hacking Fest, which is
I think it's the first week of May. Maybe, is that right?
May 4th through 6th, 2022. Pre-conference training are the 3rd and the 4th.
Yeah, so
I'm literally reading from the email that's on the other part of my screen.
There you go. So it's our professionally evil application security course. We'd love to have as many people join in as possible. We are also going to be at B-Sides, Oklahoma in 2 weeks in the great state of Oklahoma.
Don't you mean B-Sides decent?
B-Sides decent. No, it's just B-Sides okay.
B-Sides okay.
Just okay, yeah. I'm pretty sure we have the distinction of being the only B-Sides that's named after the state instead of the city. But
I think you're right.
Yeah, for historical reasons. But anyway.
History.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yep. We'll chat again in 2 weeks. Bye.